Hey everybody, this is Mike with Birdman Gaming, and today, as I promised last week, we are going to go over a quick uh, overview of how well Omnath is being done. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in just a little bit more here. But before we jump into that, remember, if you like my content, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And if you just are passing by and feel free to subscribe. It doesn't cost anything. It only takes a couple seconds. And it helps the channel. But we are here to talk about Omnath. I've been working on this deck for 2 years. Maybe a little longer, actually. Slowly getting it foiled out and looking very pretty. It's an expensive, hard to do project, especially when you have no income. Genevieve is here. She's hanging out with us today. This is going to be our last visit with her this year. Unless she feels like coming out for Christmas. I don't know yet. So, anyway, we are working on Omnath Locus of Creation. And it's not fully foiled yet. Now, the commander himself, he is foiled out. When they spoiled this card, I knew right then I wanted to build this deck. I really like the landfall mechanic, and if you have a deck that has multiple landfall triggers, it helps a lot, and this guy does that. First land, you gain 4 life. Second land in a turn, get 1 of each mana that it costs to cast him. And the third, it deals 4 damage to each opponent and each planeswalker you don't control. So, very solid. Very solid creature. It wouldn't be a landfall deck without the lands. So, let's go ahead and get that stack of land here. And we're going to start off with our basics. I'm going to put that off the camera, off to the side here real fast. We're not running a whole lot of basics, as you can see. And yes, my decks are double sleeved in Dragon Shield Matte and KMC Perfect Fit Hards. Because of the value of this deck, and just I want to make sure everything stays safe and firm. And as you can see, these are all foils, and there's no curving or anything. So we have 1 plains, 2 islands, 2 mountains, 4 forests. That is the basics for this deck. Eventually, they're all going to be uniform from the same set. Probably Unfinity, if I can get enough of the Unfinity foils. Next, we are going for our lands that can fetch other lands to where we have 2 landfall triggers in a turn. So anything that can fetch. We've got our Fabled Passage. Searches for a basic, puts it into play tap. Then if you have 4 or more lands, you untap it. Good card. Prismatic Vista, pay a life, sacrifice it, search for a basic, put it onto the battlefield and shuffle. Then we've got, well, let's go ahead and go with the not super fancy. We got a Khans of Tarkir Wooded Foothills, sack, search for your mountain or forest, and that can be non-basic mountain or forest. put it on the battlefield, then shuffle. Arid Mesa, borderless foil. Pay a life, sacrifice it, search your library for a mountain or plains, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. A Nationals foil of Flooded Strand. Pay a life, sacrifice it, search your library for a plains or an island, put it into play, shuffle. A Expedition foil, Misty Rainforest. Pay a life, sacrifice it, search your library for a forest or island, put it into play, shuffle. Windswept Heath, Expedition foil. Pay a life, sacrifice it, search your library for a forest or plains, put it into play, shuffle. And Scalding Tarn, which, if you watched last week's video, you will have known that we opened a retro foil. But this is an expedition foil. It's a little bit more pricey, about $10, maybe $15 more. Pay a life, sacrifice it, search your library for an island or a mountain, put into play, shuffle. The only one of these that's not foil is the Prismatic Vista. I'm working on trying to find one. So, possibly a expedition foil. Just because I like that art style. Next, we will be talking about our lands that we can search out for. Yep. Okay. Let's start off with Dryad Arbor. He's a forest. He's also a creature, but I can search him out with one of the lands that searches for a forest. So that's helpful. Then we've got our Stomping Ground, which is a mountain forest. A Breeding Pool, which is a forest island. These are what are known as shocklands. When they come into play, you can have it enter untapped if you take 2 damage, which back in the day, that was a spell called Shock. Deal 2 damage. So, Steam Vents, Island Mountain, Shockland. Temple Garden, Forest Plains, Shockland. Hallowed Fountain, Plains Island, Shockland. Sacred Foundry, Mountain Plains, Shockland. If you can tell, we're still missing 4 of these in foil. Next, we will move on to Triomes. Just a couple years ago, they introduced Triomes, which are lands that are 3 color, 3 land types, and that can be fetched. So we've got Aspara's Headquarters. Enters the battlefield tapped, but it's a forest plain island. Then we've got Jetmir's Garden, which is a pre-release foil, and it's a mountain forest plains, enters the battlefield tapped. These can also be late game. You can pay 3 and discard it to draw a card. Next, we've got our utility lands. Bosiju, Who Endures. It is a legendary land. I can just tap it to get a green mana, or I can pay a green and 1 and discard it from my hand to destroy an artifact, enchantment, or non-basic land an opponent controls. That player searches their library for a land and with a basic land type and put it on the battlefield. Then shuffle. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each legendary creature I control. Really good card in this deck. Valakut the Molten Pinnacle. It enters tapped. Whenever a mountain enters the battlefield under my control, if I control at least 5 other mountains, I may have Valakut the Molten Pinnacle deal 3 damage to target creature or player. That will come into play a whole lot here very shortly. There's a couple cards that boost this ability dramatically. Terrain Generator. Very simple. Tap to add a generic or 2, and tap it. Put a basic land card from my hand onto the battlefield tapped. So it's just an extra land drop. Thespian Stage. Tap, add 1 generic. Tap 2, tap it. And it becomes a copy of any land. Hello, Mr. Valakut. Vesuva. I may have Vesuva enter the battlefield as a copy of any land on the battlefield. Hello, Mr. Valakut. In Commander, you can only play 1 copy of the card, except for your basic lands. This is a way around that. 3 Valakuts, pretty good. But what if I don't have enough mountains? We'll come across that here shortly. Wasteland. Tap, add a colorless. Tap, sacrifice it, destroy target non-basic. Strip Mine. Tap, add a colorless, and this is an expedition foil. Tap, sacrifice it, destroy target land. Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth. Each land is a forest in addition to its other types. That doesn't help with mountains. Don't worry, we'll get there. Mana Confluence. Pale Life, tap it, add 1 mana of any color. So it's mana fixing. Cavern Souls. When it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Tap, add a colorless. Tap, add 1 mana of any color. Spend that mana only to cast a creature spell of the chosen type. That spell cannot be countered. Oh, look, Mr. Omnath's an elemental. Oh, no. He can't be countered. Reflecting Pool. Tap, add 1 mana of any type that a land you control could produce. I've got 3 lands here that can, 2 lands here that can produce any color. So that winds up being also any color. And that's our land base. We have 1 Planeswalker. Renin 7. Enters with 5 loyalty for 5 mana. Add 1 loyalty. Reveal the top 4 cards in your library. Put all land cards revealed this way into your hand. The rest into your graveyard. 0. Put any number of lands from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. -3 loyalty. Create a green treefolk creature token with reach, and this creature's power and toughness are each equal to the number of lands you control. -8. Return all permanent cards from your graveyard to your hand. You get an emblem with "You have no max hand size." Good card. It's not the Planeswalker I want. I want a Renin 7 in the deck. I mean, a Renin 6, but those things are ridiculously expensive. Let's move to our enchantments. We've got our land tax. At the beginning of your upkeep, if an opponent controls more lands than you, you may search your library for up to 3 basic lands. Reveal them, put them in your hand, then shuffle your library. This is probably going to be replaced when I get a burgeoning, because burgeoning is just a better option in this slot. Impact Tremors. This actually will come into play here shortly with some of the other shenanigans I do. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under my control, Impact Tremors deals 1 damage to each opponent. Good card. Exploration. I may play an additional land every turn. Felidar Retreat. Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under my control, I choose 1. Create a cat token. That's a 2/2. Or put a +1/+1 counter on each creature I control. Those creatures gain vigilance until end of turn. Prismatic Omen. All lands I control are every basic land type in addition to their normal types. Remember Valakut talking about mountains? This makes all my lands mountains, in addition to their other types. I've got another card that does the same thing, but it's not this one. Cathar's Crusade. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under my control, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature I control. That comes into play here shortly, too. Our instants and sorceries. Now, forgive me, this is in Japanese, so it's Growth Spiral, instant. You may play an additional land this turn, draw a card for a green and a blue. Very good card. Cyclonic Rift. Return target permanent to you don't control to its owner's hand for 2 mana, or for 7, do it to all non-land permanents that you don't control. Amazing card. I need it in foil, but it's expensive. Double Major. Copy target creature spell you control, except it isn't legendary if it is already legendary. So I can copy my commander. If I'm casting my commander, pay an additional 2, I get 2 copies of them. When he enters, I also draw a card. So, crop rotation. Sacrifice as an additional cost, sacrifice a land. Search my library for a land, put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle. Great card. Mystic Reflection. Instant. Choose target non-legendary creature. The next time one or more creatures or planeswalkers enter the battlefield this turn, they enter as copies of the chosen creature. Good card. Swords to Plowshares. Exile a creature. Its controller gains life equal to its power. Path to Exile. Exile target creature. Its controller searches its library for a basic land, put it into play tapped. Sublime Epiphany. Choose one or more for 6 mana. Counter target spell, counter target activated or triggered ability. Return a non-land permanent to its owner's hand. Create a token that's a copy of the target creature you control, and target player draws a card. Usually you do all 5. Worldly Tutor. Search your library for a creature card, reveal that card, shuffle your library, and put that creature on top. It's an instant, so I do it at the end of the opponent's turn to get any of the things I actually need for this deck to go off. 3 visits. Search your library for a forest, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. This can get the non-basic forests in the deck. Nature's Lore. Search your library for a forest, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. Same thing. Skyshroud Claim. Search your library for up to 2 forests, put them into play, then shuffle. Life from the Loam. Return 3 target land cards from your graveyard to your hand, up to. Dredge 3. If I would draw, I can instead put the top 3 cards of my library into my graveyard. If I do, I put this back into my hand. Great sorcery. Seagate Restoration. I never worry about the other side. It's a land that produces blue. That's it. I always look at this side. Draw cards equal to the number of cards in your hand, +1. You have no max hand size for the rest of the game. Really good card. Natural Order. As an additional cost, sacrifice a green creature. Search your library for a green creature card, put it into play, then shuffle. This is basically to get my win condition. Inscription of Insight. Choose one. If the spell was kicked, choose any number. Return up to 2 creatures to their owner's hands. Scry 2, then draw 2. Then target player creates an XX blue illusion, where X is the number of cards in their hand. Decent card. Sylvan's Crying. Search your library for a land, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle. Rite of Replication. Put a token onto the battlefield that's a copy of target creature. If Rite was kicked, put up to 5 Put 5 of those tokens onto the battlefield instead. Cultivate. Search your library for 2 basics, up to 2 basics. Reveal those cards. Put 1 onto the battlefield tapped, the other one in your hand. Now, let's go with artifacts. And then we'll go into our creature base. So we're starting off with Chromatic Orrery. You may spend mana as though it was any color. Tap, add 5 colorless. Tap 5, tap it. Draw a card for each color amongst permanents you control. This card is a powerhouse draw engine. Soul Ring. Pretty generic. 1 mana artifact. Tap, add 2 colorless to your pool. Gurapur Orrery. A little bit of group hug. Each player may play an additional land on each of their turns. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, if that player has no cards in hand, they draw 3. Then they draw their normal draw for the turn. Crucible of Worlds. You may play lands from your graveyard. Yes, it is a foil, borderless Crucible of Worlds. Chromatic Orrery. Lands you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. This also taps to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Helm of the Host. Equipment. At the beginning of combat on your turn, create a token of a token that's a copy of equipped creature, except the token isn't legendary if the equipped creature is legendary. That token gains haste. So I can equip it to Omnath, enter combat, get another Omnath, draw a card. Then swing with the token. Keep Omnath back. Arcane Signet. I absolutely love this art for Arcane Signet. 2 mana. Tap. Add 1 mana of any color to your commander's color identity. Skyclave Relic. Indestructible. Enters the battlefield. If it was kicked, you get 2 more of these tapped. It adds 1. You can tap it to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Soul Talisman. Extended foil. Suspend. Soul Ring. Suspend cost is 1. At the beginning of your upkeep, remove a suspend counter. When there's none on it, when you remove the last suspend counter, you cast it. Panharmonicon. If an artifact or creature enters the battlefield, causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control, triggers an additional Titan. Great card. Rings of Bright Earth. This is an OG foil, one of the newer additions to this deck. Whenever you play an activated ability, if it isn't a mana ability, you may pay 2. If you do, copy that ability. You may choose new targets for that copy. So, something like a Ren and 7 ability, pay 2. Hey, I get it again. Or, let's just say, pay 2 on top of one of these activated abilities of the Form Engine, which copies an activated or triggered ability you control. I may choose new targets for that copy. Copies an instant or sorcery spell I control. I may choose new targets for that copy, or copies a permanent spell I control. Commander Sphere. Tap. Add 1 mana of any color of my commander's identity. Tap. Sacrifice it to draw a card. This is from the Dungeons and Dragons Secret Lair, and that is the Dungeon Master from the 1980s cartoon. That's why I had to get it. Mirror Box. The legend rule does not apply to permanents you control. Each legendary creature you control gets +1/+1. Each non-token creature you control gets +1/+1 for each other creature you control with the same name as that creature. Really good card for a couple reasons, and we will go into that with our creature base, which is right here. First, let's go with Cultivator Colossus. This card has so many weird interactions because of its enter the battlefield trigger. You must finish resolving this before they can remove it. The only way that they can stop the enter the battlefield trigger is by essentially stifling the trigger. Once it starts happening, until you can no longer play any lands from your hand, it keeps going. Then if you played a removal spell, it resolves. If you played any spell, it resolves. His power and toughness are each equal to the number of lands you control. When he enters the battlefield, you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. If you do, you draw a card and repeat the process. He does have trample, so very good card though. Ashaya, Soul of the Wild. Power and toughness equal to the number of lands you control. Non-token creatures you control are forest lands in addition to their types. No, they cannot be fetched, but they can tap for mana the turn after they come out. And there's some other interactions. In fact, let me go ahead and get that interesting interaction real fast. Couple of them. We'll start off with this guy. Lotus Cobra. Landfall. So, I've got Ashaya in play. I play Lotus Cobra. When he enters, he sees himself as a land, so a land enters. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, add 1 mana of any color. Okay, that's great. And no, yes, it will make Cultivator Colossus grow bigger. However, you can't put them into play with his ability. They just don't work like that. The other interesting interaction is Scoot Swarm. Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, create an insect token. If you control 6 or more lands, create a token that's a copy of Scoot Swarm. So, okay, I've got Ashaya in play. And 5 lands. So that's 6 lands. Well, actually, 4 lands. And Ashaya, which is 5. Scoot Swarm enters. Sees itself as number 6. Get another Scoot Swarm. Easy enough. Coiling Oracle. When it enters, reveal the top 4 cards of my library, or the top card of my library. If it's a land, put it onto the battlefield. Otherwise, put it in my hand. Good card. Avenger of Zendikar. When it enters, I get a 0/1 plant token for every land I control. Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under my control, I may put a +1/+1 counter on every plant creature token I control. Every plant creature I control. Oh, look. He's a plant. Save that for last. Bloom Tender. Tap. For each color amongst permanents I control, add 1 mana of that color. Terror of the Peaks. Flying. Spells my opponents cast that target terror cost an additional 3 life to cast. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under my control, Terror of the Peaks deals damage equal to that creature's power to any target. So, Scoot Swarm. Deal a point. Scoot Swarm token. Deal a point. Play a land. 2 more Scoot Swarms. Deal 2 points. It's a fetch land. Fetch. Deal 4 more points. So on and so forth. Venser. Flash. When he enters the battlefield, return target spell or permanent to its owner's hand. Great card. Knight of the Reliquary. +1/+1 for every land in my graveyard. Sacrifice a forest or plain, search my library for a land, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. Good search. Helps thin out the deck. Timestream Navigator. Ascend. If I control 10 or more permanents, I get the city's blessing. So 1/1 for 2. Pay 4, tap it, put Timestream Navigator on the bottom of my library, take an extra turn after this one, only if I have the city's blessing. Ramunap Excavator. I can play lands from my graveyard. Self-explanatory. Solemn Simulacrum. 2/2 for 4. When he enters, search my library for a basic land, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. When he dies, I may draw a card. Eternal Witness. When Eternal Witness enters the battlefield, I may return target card from my graveyard to my hand. Really good card. It wouldn't be one of my videos in one of my decks without a Bird of Paradise. Flying. Tap, add 1 mana of any color to my mana pool. Clever Impersonator. I may have it enter the battlefield as a copy of any non-land permanent on the battlefield. Any enchantment, any artifact, anything. Oh, one of your creatures. Okay, done. Ancient Green Warden. I may play lands from my graveyard. If a land enters the battlefield causing a trigger of a permanent I control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So, Omnath, Lotus Cobra, Scoot Swarm, Thaladar Retreat, all of those. And he's got reach. He can block creatures with flying. Dryad of the Elysian Grove. I may play an additional land each turn. Lands I control have every basic land type in addition to their other types. Sylvan Caryatid. Defender. Hexproof. Tap, add 1 mana of any color to my mana pool. Progenitor Mimic. I may have it enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield except it has, at the beginning of my upkeep, if this isn't a token, create a token that's a copy of this creature. So, with Mirror Box, oh look, I have 2 Omnaths. Next turn, I have another Omnath. Next turn, I have another Omnath. It gets silly. Kozilek, the Butcher of Truth. Yes, he's non-foil. He's expensive foil. I don't have the money, so I'm not going to complain. This, if you watched, not last week, but the week before's video, this was in a raffle I won. Whenever I cast him, I draw 4 cards. When he's put in the graveyard from anywhere, I shuffle my entire graveyard back into my library. When he attacks, defending player must sacrifice 4 permanents before blockers are declared. And last, but surely not least, one of my win conditions. Craterhoof Behemoth, or in this one specific case, the Doodlehoof Behemoth. He is a 5/5 for 8 with haste. When he enters the battlefield, all creatures I control, including him, gain trample, get +X/+X, where X is the number of creatures I control. So Scoot Swarm tokens, I have 40 of them. Everything is +40/+40. Swing. Trample. Oh look, you block. You don't block enough. The rest of it tramples over. So, that is Omnath. I absolutely love this deck. This is my project. I've been working on it, like I said, 2 or 3 years now. And it is definitely a labor to put together. But when we have those pet projects, we put in the time, you know. So, with all that being said, as I always say, take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. I love you guys, and I'll see you guys at the pre-release.